This is Lightning Power Lunch with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli on Lightning Radio.
Well, I think it's tough when you come out of these breaks. That the first one, especially Seattle, even though it was a back-to-back, they played a game, and we hadn't played in 10 days, and 3 of our guys hadn't practiced, or 4 of our guys for the whole week with the team, and then it was JJ's first game back, and so there was a lot of newness to the game for us. But I thought we defended well. There was definitely rust in our game, but the boys found a way, and Match the goalie was really good for us. So hopefully we take another step forward today.
Take another step. Got to figure they are going to have to, because they're going to be playing a pretty angry Edmonton team who has not looked great since resuming play. But we're going to talk to a good friend.
Is it me, Greg, or did John Cooper basically parrot everything that we said on yesterday's show?
You think he was listening?
You have asked, does John Cooper listen to Power Lunch? I'm not sure John Cooper is aware that Power Lunch exists, but I am glad to hear that we are in simpatico with him. Yeah, look, he's right. They did have rust to their game.
Yeah.
And he said, it was a back-to-back where we were the rested team, but Seattle had an advantage by having played the night before. I think all of that was true. But now that shouldn't be an issue. And you're right. They're getting an Edmonton team tonight that's given up a boatload of goals, 13 goals in the last 2 games. Even the game before the break, they lost, I think, 5-4 to Colorado. So, those are some ugly defensive numbers. And that has dropped Edmonton a little bit in terms of their ranking defensively. They're still under 3. We will have Jack Michaels, who's our go-to guy.
We love him.
When it's Lightning Oilers. I told him, we don't have a gift to give you, but maybe my gift to you will be to show you the way to the press box that does not involve the freight elevator. And he's like, where have you been these last 15 years? Yes. So that is our deal. I will show him, because he's meeting someone tonight in the stands. He's like, I need to get down and back up. I'm like, I got you, man. So you remember they used to give out, you remember this working in radio, they give out gift cards or like watches, like if you had guests on. That sort of swag has dried up in this industry.
Let me tell you what they used to do in radio, and they may still do this right now, the way that industry is going to a degree, is that if you were filling in for the main host, they might not be able to pay you. They would here's some gift cards. And it's like,
it was at least barter, though.
Come on. Yeah, but is that going to pay the bills? You know what I mean? That's always makes
a host
me
is doing more heavy lifting than a guest. So for Jack's 15 to 20 minutes or whatever he's on, and it's not the first time, he might be one of our most regular opposing team guests that we've had.
He's been good, and Dan Rosen, I think, has made more appearances on this show. Chris Johnston, actually, too, I think.
Those are the national people.
Yeah, the national guys.
I think Connor with Colorado, he's come on pretty regularly with us. Connor McGahey.
Yes, he has.
Trying to think of some others.
I'm sure the Florida guys, right? We've had them on,
I think when we've played the Panthers, though, it hasn't dovetailed with the Power Lunch show, but Doug Plagans has come on with us for sure.
Yeah, he has. Who's the best team in the West? Because I think...
Well, point-wise, it's
Winnipeg.
They're on a 10-game win streak right now.
It's
kind of like, show me what you got in the playoffs. I think that is certainly the case for Winnipeg, which has gotten to one conference final in franchise history and has often gone out in the first round.
That's correct.
And I think, for Washington, those same questions are going to abound because, yes, Ovechkin has won a Stanley Cup. And they have other guys who have more experience on that team. And Tom Wilson's won a Stanley Cup, as John Carlson. So, it's not like they don't have anybody who's been involved in deep playoff runs, but you look at their group.
Yeah.
And they have some guys who are newer to the NHL who have played very well. But, what kind of experience does Connor McMichael have last year? They've had great success in the minors. Hershey has won a bunch of Calder Cups recently. Alexi Protas, he's a main guy on their team. He has very limited NHL experience. Logan Thompson was part of that Vegas team that won a cup. Okay, fair enough. But is he going to play? Is it going to be Charlie Lindgren? So I think that it's kind of like for Washington, you've had this great regular season, and things have really fallen into place for the Capitals this year. Like, it's not quite like the Lightning in their 2018-19 season when they won 62, but have the Capitals faced adversity this year? You might say when Ovechkin had his leg injury and they had to go whatever number of games without him, fair enough. But Ovechkin has been one guy pulling on the rope. He hasn't been the only guy pulling on the rope. Like, they've done it because they played really well as a team. So I'm not saying they're not going to win a round. I'm just saying that I think the same questions that are going to be at the doorstep of the Winnipeg Jets are going to be at the doorstep of the Washington Capitals going into the playoffs, where they will be heavy favorites. They will be in their first-round series.
I think
for sure.
Winnipeg, for me, checks more boxes in terms of being a team that can make a deep run than Washington. And that's
so you're not sold on Washington.
I just think there are maybe a few more unknowns, particularly in net.
Show me.
Hellebuck.
That's kind of your attitude. Yeah.
You got to listen. Hellebuck's got to show you in the playoffs, but I don't think there are many people who dispute he's one of the best goaltenders in the game.
Mm-hmm.
With Washington, to what you just pointed out, you're still kind of like, okay, what do we got there? Is that going to work out? And maybe it does. I feel like there's more known commodities on Winnipeg in terms of the personnel, and I think there's more star power. Star power sometimes lends itself in a playoff series to be a difference in a series, and that could become your goaltender. But you look at Winnipeg's roster partner, and you see some of the players they have. I mean, Kyle Connor, if he's not a superstar, he's pretty close to it. I mean, he's a gifted goal scorer. Scheifele's an incredible player.
Way more playoff experience on the Winnipeg side.
That is correct.
Just in terms of number of players who have been in the playoffs, NHL playoffs, and games.
Correct.
You just count up the games. Ovechkin's going to help because he's played a lot of playoff games. But for Winnipeg, it's going to be, all right, you've been there. Now are you going to make good on the promise of this season? And they're in a tough division. I mean, if they do finish first, they're going to avoid Dallas and Minnesota.
Yeah.
And Dallas and Minnesota likely will have to play each other in the first round. But it's still a tough division. And if Winnipeg gets through a first-round series, the Jets are going to get the winner of that Minnesota-Dallas series in round two. And look, Minnesota has questions to answer too. The Wild have had more than Winnipeg so many years of playoff disappointment, where maybe they weren't a huge favorite to win a series, but they were at least considered to do well, and more often than not, they lose in the first round. Dallas has the best recent history of playoff success, having, won a round, won 2 rounds, et cetera, et cetera. In the East, though, I mean, it's clear that Washington, first of all, it's clear Washington's going to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
It seems clear that they are going to win their division, and it seems clear that they are going to have the number 1 seed. So they're going to get wild card 2. They will be a huge favorite in that first round series, no matter who is in the wild card 2 slot, if all this plays out the way it looks like it's going to play out. But the playoffs are a different animal. And I mean, I think the world of Spencer Carberry, because I don't think a lot of people expected the Capitals to be where they are this year. And you have to give credit to the head coach. This is kind of tying into that Coach of the Year discussion, which we're not going to get into today. But even if you take that out of the equation and we use the Greg Linnelli approach, which is just give the Stanley Cup champion coach the Jack Adams Award, fine. If we're going to forget about voting for Coach of the Year, there's no disputing that Spencer Carberry has done a masterful job with the Washington Capitals this year. How much will he be able to help so many of their players who are new or newish to the NHL postseason navigate that? And carrying the burden of being favored, which they will be. They're going to be favored in the first round.
I think that's fair. What's interesting is, I think, we talked about this with the Lightning. Let's bring it back to tonight's game.
Edmonton is kind of in the same boat in that the Oilers are going to make the playoffs, and they're going to have a huge weight of expectation on their shoulders. And Jack has told us in past years, it's like they don't win the cup. Now, after having got to the final last year, anything less than a cup championship will probably be viewed as a disappointment for the Oilers. And,
I think that's fair.
That is a heavy burden to carry.
And I'm wondering
into the playoffs.
But I'm wondering, like with the Lightning, and you mentioned Winnipeg, does it matter where you finish more so this year in the regular season to avoid those difficult matchups in the first round? Because I think there's some validity to it. Now, I think we all understand the playoffs are hard, and it's going to be a bear regardless of who you play, maybe even in the first round, which can be a little bit more unpredictable because it's the start of everything, and maybe guys are a little more fresh and juiced to go, and everybody for the most part is relatively healthy. But I do wonder if people are looking at the standings and the matchups a little closer this year to see if you can gain that edge when there is a lot of parity, but you also see, to your point, in the Western Conference for Winnipeg, making even more sense to be a number 1 seed to avoid a 2-3 matchup. And we talked about it with the Lightning. You know, whoever they play is going to be difficult, again, assuming they make the playoffs. But would you rather take on that 8th seed or that 7th seed compared to, let's just call it what it is, Toronto or Florida in the first round? And look, you take who you take and let the chips fall where they may. You just want to get in, and I understand that. But are we looking at it a little closer because of just the way the things have transpired up to this point, and you know, maybe where some other teams are or aren't, that any help you can get, you'll take to make that path a little easier?
I'm a big believer that winning a playoff series is always a challenge.
Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes you might look at a matchup and say, boy, this, and I just said that the 2-3 in the Central, Winnipeg, if the Jets finish first, they'll avoid that first round matchup, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be some kind of cakewalk by not facing one of those teams, because the playoffs can kind of take on a life of their own. We saw that, and again, we keep going back to this example, but it's such a, not a great memory for Lightning fans, but it's a great example of how a series can take on a life of its own in short order, and that was 2019 Lightning Blue Jackets.
Yeah.
That game 1, the way that game unfolded and flipped the script on what everybody expected, and it had an effect on the psyche of the players involved too, on both sides. You know, you blinked and within a week the Lightning were out. Even though they had a 3-0 lead after the first period in game 1, it looked like they were just going to crush the Blue Jackets. Didn't happen. So in a playoff series, and this is the old cliche, but like anything can happen in a playoff series. Does the favored team more often than not win when there is a clear favorite? Yeah, probably, but it's not guaranteed. And sometimes it's the sort of matchup that you're getting. You know, you might have two really competitive teams in terms of their record, but maybe one matches up a little bit better in that particular matchup. You know, and for the team that is matching up better, that matchup may actually be more advantageous than seeing a lower seeded team that kind of has your kryptonite a little bit. I mean, kind of broad stroking it, but you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Sometimes the individual matchups matter, which is one reason why, going back to 2019, fans who've listened to the show have heard me tell the story. You know, there were three possibilities. The Lightning, they were locked in as the first seed down the stretch in the regular season, so they were going to get wild card too, kind of like we're talking about with Washington this year. And I heard from so many Lightning fans that of the three teams that were potentially going to be the Lightning's first round opponent, Columbus, the team they got, Carolina, which finished in wild card 1 and did upset Washington in the first round, and Montreal, which finished out of the playoffs.
Right.
I heard so much from Lightning fans about anyone but Montreal. We don't want to see Carey Price. Well, they didn't get Carey Price, and they lost the series anyway. But I think, like, okay, Montreal maybe wasn't as threatening a team overall, but they had the goalie, right?
Yeah, right.
And a team that is less talented with the stud goalie might neutralize an advantage one team might otherwise have. So I think Jack is ready, so we can bring him in. Is he joining us on video? Yes, he is.
Oh, there he is.
He's a man about town. Look at that.
Look at him.
I am.
Where are you headed to, Jack?
You know, I'm buying, I'm selling, I'm trying to, make my impact in life. No,
Well,
no,
in Edmonton, you joined us from Wayne Gretzky's old locker. This is kind of a step down, even though you're
true.
outside.
That is true. I tried to make it a little interesting, so I'm here on the east side of town right now. But it's a good point you make in terms of matchups. I mean, look at the Oilers last year. They advanced to the Stanley Cup final, and LA scores a late goal to force overtime and eventually get a win in their 82nd game, which totally changed the matchup because it would have been Edmonton-Vegas in the first round if LA loses that game.
Yeah.
And, Edmonton-Vegas in the first round, all of a sudden they go from Edmonton, Vegas, and then theoretically Vancouver. Now it's LA, a team they've already beaten twice in the playoffs, and they get LA and Vancouver while Dallas has to deal with Vegas and Colorado. And I'm sorry, I'm not taking anything away from what Edmonton accomplished last season, but even you Eastern folks know that Vegas, Colorado is a different sort of gamut than LA and Vancouver. I'm sorry. And I don't mind saying that. And I think we've seen that, as I might have said on this show previously, everything that could have gone right did go right for Vancouver last year. They're not a 109-point team. And what's interesting about this matchup is everyone's saying, well, is Edmonton better? Well, no, they're not. But who is better in the league right now? Winnipeg actually has the same personnel. Their power play happens to be 10% better. Washington is the team that everyone has an eye on, but can they do it in the playoffs? And then everyone else, in my opinion, is the same or worse with the possible exception of Tampa. And the biggest difference there, we all know, and Mish, I'm not going to comment on your team and try to sound like an expert. But look, 88 is back to being 88. And that makes all the difference and makes Tampa a real lethal threat, even though some of the problems that exist a year ago in terms of depth of lineup, which plague Edmonton as well, is still there. You look at McDonough and you look at Vasilevsky. Them being back and back to what they really are makes Tampa as dangerous an opponent as there is in the Eastern Conference.
Just a quick follow-up on what you were saying about last year's playoff. Do you feel that Dallas was adversely affected by those matchups in the first two rounds by the time they played the Oilers?
Absolutely. They were down 2-0 against Vegas. I mean, they lost the first two. They had to go. They were going to Vegas down 2-0. And, they survive a game 7. I think they won 3-2. Colorado, as you know, may not be the best team in the league at any point, but they're certainly the most dangerous. I mean, Colorado is the one team, along with Edmonton, I would say, that can embarrass you. No matter how they might be playing at a certain point in time, they're a team where if they get rolling on a particular night, you're not beating them. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm sorry, you have at the time McKinnon, Rantanen, Makar. Those three enough are able to make any team look silly, and that's kind of the same thing that Edmonton brings to the table. Tampa on a little bit lesser of a scale, but obviously in 2019 when they had the depth up and down offensively, they would embarrassed a lot of teams that year, even though they didn't end up winning it. I would say absolutely Dallas was weathered by the time they hit Edmonton. And I know people are going to say, well, the Oilers went 7 against Vancouver. Not the same type of series. Just wasn't. It was not an overly physical series. And I think, to be honest with you, if anything, Edmonton, not known for their physicality, even at that time, wore down Quinn Hughes a little bit in the series. He was asked to do a lot, and Quinn Hughes does not have the same, body structure that a Cale Makar has, and I think he got worn down, and Evan Bouchard outplayed him, and the Oilers were able to withstand some shaky goaltending and get through that series. But it was not the same kind of series that Dallas, Colorado, Dallas, Vancouver was. And even though Dallas, Colorado went 6 games, that was 6 games with overtime in game 6. I mean, those were 2 brutal matchups.
Jack, what do you make of the Oilers this year? And do you feel like matchups, especially in the playoffs and seeding, matters more because of some of the things you mentioned?
I don't think so this year, and here's why. I don't think anyone's gotten better. I think you have an argument in the East besides Washington. Obviously, they're getting huge seasons from Protus and McMichael and some guys we just couldn't have possibly envisioned. I mean, did we envision that Washington would have the number one offensive team in the league and the number one offensive team from the back end? I mean, they've got a guy on their back end that hasn't scored a goal in 140 games, and they still got the number one offense. But outside of that, Tampa's the only team that's better because Vasilevsky is back to form, and they've got Ryan McDonough, who's kind of stabilized things. But Florida got worse. Toronto got worse. I mean, the Rangers obviously got worse. They've tumbled out of it for now. Detroit, you could say, is a little better, but they've still got some holes defensively. And in the West, there's no question. Vegas is not the same. Colorado is not the same. Edmonton is not the same. They're not as quick. They don't have the youthful jump. They're missing. What does Edmonton need right now? They need Dylan Holloway is what they need. They need a guy in the middle six who can fly and score. And, they added Jeff Skinner and they added Victor Arvidsson, and that slowed them down a little bit. They don't have, Ryan McLeod was not a great scorer, although he has a career high this year, and that always seems to happen. But he could fly. He could transport the puck. He could play with Connor McDavid because he could skate with McDavid. So I don't think it matters because I don't think anyone in the West is better. And again, let me clarify. People are going to say, are you kidding me? Winnipeg is much, much better. Winnipeg has the exact same team. Look at their roster. They didn't add anyone. They didn't add anybody. No offseason. The offseason acquisition line is actually zero. But their power play is 10% better, and they've got Connor Hellebuck. So they've got a little bit of the Tampa mojo in terms of having a goalie that's very good. Now, unlike Tampa, they've also got a 2-year history now of their goalie playing horrendously in the playoffs. Connor Hellebuck, I believe, is 1-8 with a save percentage of under 86 the last 2 postseasons. So that's why, for me, when you look at Washington and Winnipeg, you have to say at this point the jury is still out. Washington hasn't won a postseason series in 7 years, and Winnipeg has the same team and a much better power play. And Mish knows as well as I do, your power plays are going to go from 5 to 2 in the postseason. In fact, you're going to be lucky to get 2.
That's basically what we started the show talking about, that for Washington and Winnipeg, it's going to kind of be a show me when the playoffs start.
Absolutely. You said it in 2 words a lot better than I said it in 2000.
Well, that's a first because I'm usually quite long-winded. I remember, of the many times you've joined us, Jack, I remember you joined us after the 2022 playoffs. So it was the next year. 2022 playoffs, the Lightning got to the Stanley Cup final, played Colorado. Colorado had played Edmonton in the conference final and defeated Edmonton. And I think, we asked you, looking ahead to the 2023 playoffs, what is a reasonable expectation for the Oilers? You said among the fan base, Stanley Cup or bust. So fast forward a couple of years. Yeah, so here this team got to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final, even though you yourself are acknowledging they are not maybe as deep as they were last year. What is the mentality of the city, and what kind of burden does that put on the players entering the playoffs with these weighty expectations?
It's a burden they've always carried. I mean, I think it's a different type of city as Tampa, but it's the same kind of burden that Tampa was carrying with them into the 1920 season. They've done everything but win. At least that version. Obviously, the Lightning and Oilers have won cups in years past prior to that. But what I'm saying is, if you think about the Lightning, I believe, and you can correct me on the chronology, Cup final in 2015, missed by a point in an injury-plagued year in 16, back-to-back losses went up 3-2 in the conference finals in 17 and 18, and then a historic year in 19 ruined at the hands of Columbus by a 4-game sweep. So going into 1920, obviously different city, different focus, but amongst the players, the recognizance of, well, we've done everything but win. And that's where Edmonton's at right now. The players know. I mean, they're not stupid. They know that they're going to be judged by whether they win a Stanley Cup with this version of a team or not. And by this version of a team, I mean McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, Nurse. And, now you're starting to get Ekholm and Skinner and some of these guys who've been around a while now. Ultimately, that's what they're going to be judged by. That's all that matters, Mish. And again, what I would say is I think the league has basically scrunched. In other words, the improvement amongst the NHL teams this year are all pretty much teams 15 through 32. Out of the top 15, like I said, you've got Washington, Winnipeg, a little bit of a show me. Tampa, you can make an argument, is better because Vasilevsky is back to form and they've added Ryan McDonough. But outside of that, tell me a team that's honestly gotten better. No one's gotten better. Most of them are slightly worse. Now, that could change, obviously, at the deadline. But at this point, the very good teams last year, I mean, right now, who's on track to finish with 110 points? Last year, I think there were 5 teams. This year, they're right now there's 2. Yeah. And the rest are going to be lucky to finish with more than 102 or 103. The last couple of years, as you guys know, we've had a ton that are at least at like 106, 107. This year, the good teams aren't that good, and the bad teams aren't as bad as they've been.
You mentioned getting better, and sometimes if a team doesn't make a move, Jack, you're hoping internally certain players get better. Has that happened with the Oilers up to this point? And do you think they will try to improve their team at the trade deadline if a deal's there?
They better. I mean, yeah, I think there's, because, like I said, the pack is a little bit bigger at the top. I mean, right now, I would say this, last year, and again, I'll look at it from a Tampa perspective first. Last year, Tampa was not a favorite. I mean, they were not a favorite to go deep. This year, in 1 year, who is appreciably better than Tampa right now? And it's not like Tampa has a phenomenal record. They have a good record, but right now they're on a season-long winning streak, and it's 5 games. It's not 10, it's not 12. But honestly, you look at it, I'm not sure there's someone I would really feel comfortable picking over Tampa. Same thing with Edmonton. I don't think Edmonton's had a great year, but I think on the outside looking in, who's better? So that's what makes the deadline so impactful, is there could be separation at the deadline. And there could be, instead of a roster of maybe 10 to 12 teams right now that could theoretically win it, you could see that shrink to 5 or 6. And that's why the Oilers need to find, in my opinion, a little depth on the left side on defense, and probably, a middle 6 forward with some speed and pop offensively. I mean, that's ultimately what they're going to need. So, I think they absolutely need to make a move to improve their team. And in terms of within, I think you look at some of the career years that Tampa had, and they didn't win a cup in 2019. Is Zach Hyman ever going to score 54 goals again? I don't know. Is Ryan Nugent-Hopkins ever going to put up 100 points again? I don't know. I'm not saying they can't, but I'm not surprised they've regressed a little bit more to the mean. So what you're looking for really from Edmonton is a couple of moves at the deadline and then a couple guys to get hot in the postseason that haven't had great regular seasons. I mean, quite frankly, I mentioned Washington for a reason. The reason Washington has the record they do, in addition, first of all, Logan Thompson's another guy. Similar to Protas and McMichael, did we think Logan Thompson would lose exactly 2 of 32 starts to this point? No. We would have been out of our mind had we said that. We would have been out of our mind if we had said that Tom Wilson, Connor McMichael, and Alexei Protas would have 70 goals. Not a chance. I mean,
I predicted 75.
Said,
so
I love you, but I think you've officially crossed that line towards where you might need to see somebody. If he had tried to sell me on that, I wouldn't have said that. but that's, I mean, and that's what I'm saying. Um, that's why Washington has the record they do, is because they are one of the few teams that have gotten really big years from guys that you wouldn't have thought so. And that's what the Oilers are going to need in the playoffs. They're going to need some of those guys who've had big regular seasons in years past to really, get going in the playoffs. And that includes maybe a Victor Arvidsson or a Jeff Skinner, because if they get hot, that's the kind of guy that can make a difference in a tight playoff series.
Last one for me, Jack. It's very surprising to see the Oilers get scorched coming out of the break in these first two games. 13 goals, a lot. I know there were a couple empty netters
Not
in
really.
there. Well,
Oldest team in
it's
the
surprising to us because the Oilers
Yeah.
have had objectively a good season so far. They're in much better
they've been
shape
rolling.
than a lot of the other teams in the West. So what has gone wrong more recently, or is it not recent? Is this kind of a systemic issue that you've seen prior to these last couple of games?
I think the last couple of weeks. So Tampa played well in January and was a game under 500, right?
Yeah, tough
And-
schedule.
And I think you would probably tell me that, have they played that much better during the 5-game winning streak? Is it possible they've actually played slightly worse
Yeah,
during
possible.
the 5-game winning
In some
streak?
of the games. Some of the games, yeah.
That's so Edmonton got off to another kind of shaky start. Not 2-9-1 like last year, but 6-7-1. Not great. Weren't getting good goaltending, and then got on a roll. Got good goaltending, and went on one of their runs where they won something like 20 out of 25 games. But like Tampa, and this is like Tampa maybe 3-4 years ago, the interest starts leveling off at a certain point. Once you've established a playoff position, I remember talking with John Cooper 3 or 4 years ago, and he goes, what am I going to say to these guys? Like, am I going to really get hard on them because they've lost 4 of 6 in January? And that's kind of what's crept into Edmonton's game lately. For a lot of those games heading into the break, they played just well enough to win. Caught up with them in their last game before the break. They dropped a decision to Colorado. And again, an older team, a layoff, legs weren't ready to go, pistons not firing. And, the result, I don't want to say it's predictable, but again, off a layoff, older team, not in the flow, pretty sloppy and picked apart by Philadelphia and Washington. And particularly Washington, a team that, is just buzzing right now with everyone scoring. I mean, they made plays, like I said. That tic-tac goal to Kucherov about 4 years ago that went viral. Washington scored one of those with again, a guy like Connor McMichael involved. I mean, it's just, perfect storm. Older team, not ready to go, second of a back-to-back, as Washington was. But one team's feeling awfully confident, and the other team is like, hey, can we get to April yet? And that's where Edmonton's at. And I know you guys know that feeling because Tampa, not necessarily the last 2 years, because they've got, they've had some turnover and they've got guys trying to establish themselves as full-time NHLers. But certainly Tampa 4 or 5 years ago, hey, the regular season has become an exercise. Let's get to the playoffs because that's what we're going to be judged on.
Jack, what did you make of the Four Nations tournaments, and what did you make of it for maybe Connor McDavid? Is that something you think that, does it elevate his play? People throw that. Does it elevate Connor McDavid now that he won a made-up tournament? You know what I mean? It's not everybody participated in. Come on.
I think what was elevated about Connor McDavid is a kind of his wry sense of humor, because I don't think anyone said it better. He goes, I was awful last night, and then I scored the game winner. And really, you could make an argument this has been Connor's toughest season, and he's 4th in the National Hockey League in scoring. That's how good this guy is. I mean, he's not had a great year, and he's still, sitting there at 4th, and if he goes on one of his tears, who knows? Leon Draisaitl has been Edmonton's best player all year long. I enjoyed the Four Nations tournament. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was better than I thought it'd be. It's quite frankly a recipe that I think the NBA needs to look at seriously, maybe doing a World versus North America, because their all-star game is a disaster, and even diehard NBA guys would tell you that. I enjoyed it very much. I agree. It's a bit of a made-up tournament, but I think it sows the seeds for a real nice build-up into into 2026. And, I don't mind telling you that, again, even though you're right, and I know it was not truly a best on best, because, I mean, look at the game tonight. Look at the game tonight, and if anyone wants to argue with me that it's best on best, I'd give you 86 in blue and silver and 29 in blue and orange. And tell me that it's not a best. Tell me that it's a best on best tournament. Because I would tell you, and I don't care what order you put them in.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, you're going to have a hard time convincing me that 86 and 29 are not two of the top 5 players in the NHL.
You're going to see, Jack, I think it's fair to say you could see 4 of the top 5 players in the NHL tonight. McDavid, Draisaitl, Kucherov, Vasilevsky.
Yeah, I mean,
that'd be hard to argue.
People forget because he just hasn't been himself the last couple years. But yeah, I think in an age right now where there's not great goaltending, I mean, I think there's a huge drop off after Vasilevsky and Hellebuck. When Dave and I, and more so Dave, because he's been in the league at least a half decade longer than me, if not more.
So you're saying he's old?
But bottom line is you're just more talented. That's why you were in the league quicker. But bottom line is you look at the goaltending 20 years ago, and I can think of 10 to 12 goalies that are better than goalies 3 through 10 right now. I mean,
yeah.
I'm sorry. So you're right that Vasilevsky's greatness is magnified by the fact that there's not too many guys even in the same paragraph as Vasilevsky when he's at his best. And this year he's been at his best. And I think, Ryan McDonagh being Ryan McDonagh again in a Tampa uniform has stabilized everything and made everyone better.
I want to get your thoughts one more, but I what's interesting is you wonder when it's all said and done, who ends up being closer to that greatest of all time, McDavid or Vasilevsky at their position. Because I think there's an interesting question there with the numbers Vasi's putting up.
Yeah.
In an era where there's more skill. And then McDavid.
I would say this. I think both need 2. And if what I mean by that is I think McDavid needs at least 2 to kind of get into that Mario mix.
Yeah.
Right? And I think Vasilevsky needs 2 to get to 4, which puts him into the Patrick Waugh, Martin Brodeur, Jacques Plante, Ken Dryden conversation. I would say that Vasilevsky isn't quite there yet, but if he won 2 more, then you start saying, all right. And again, a couple of those goalies, you'd say, oh, it was years ago, but look at Dryden's save percentage. It's pretty damn good.
Sure.
I mean, yes, he had a hell of a team, but I don't think Vasilevsky played behind chumps when he won them either. McDavid, same thing. He's done everything but win. And I think not that Connor McDavid is ever going to be considered Jeremy Roenick, but he needs to win a couple. I think to join that, to absolutely solidify himself in the top 5 of all time, I think McDavid would tell you he needs a win or 2. Mario won 2, and his status is unquestioned in the top 4, and he only won 2. Vasilevsky, I think, honestly, if I were to answer that honestly, I think he needs at least 2 more to join the absolute elite of the elite.
I got one last question for you on the Dave, Greg, and Jack show here on Power Lunch.
Yeah, this is our easiest show of the week, Jack. Thanks. You've done all the talking.
I wanted to get your thoughts on Mike Lang. I'm a Pittsburgh guy. You're a Pittsburgh guy. I mean, that community is very tight, and I'm sure he had an impact when you were watching games and you weren't rooting for Cleveland, or just when you got into the NHL and were able to converse with Mike and the impact that he had.
Well, I was when Mish was probably already in the NHL, I was kicking around doing high school hockey in Western Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania sets up their high school tournament as such. They do a Penguins Cup and a Flyers Cup. It's a West Final and it's an East Final. They play those games at 2, and they play the Penguins and Flyers at 7. And I was doing a Western Final, 2 o'clock, and it went overtime and double overtime, I think. And at the end, as I was packing up to get out of the way for Mike Lang, he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I gave him the usual Western Pennsylvania answer. "Oh, I'm doing some small college football and basketball, kicking around some major colleges and trying to get in the mix." And he said, "Yeah, forget all that. You should be doing hockey." He goes,
Wow.
I don't know what you need to do, but I would suggest get yourself some tapes out to a minor league team, and you should be doing hockey. Anyone can do those other sports. And I mean, the fact that, number one, he took the time to come over to me, and he could have been like, "Hey kid, get out of my way." Instead, he was like, "Hey, I thought you did a great job, blah, blah, blah. What are your career plans? How old are you? Blah, blah, blah." And, so, and then when you get to the NHL, and Dave will tell you this, the best guys are the best guys. That means the Hall of Famers, and we've lost a couple. I don't mean off this earth, but Bob Miller isn't around. Chuck Caton isn't around on a day-to-day basis, and I'm sure Dave would tell you the same thing. Great guys. Never made you feel small. Never made you feel new. Never made you feel like a rookie. They were unbelievable. Sam Rosen's another one. We're getting our last, unbelievable guy. The best guys are the best guys. And Mike Lang was one of those guys.
Yeah. He impacted a lot of people for sure. Jack, we appreciate you, bud. Every time you're able to hop on with us, talk a little puck, and I'm sure we'll talk tonight. And maybe Dave will show you the secret passageway to get up to the
I
Yeah,
gave
it's
that
about
up.
time. The amount of times I pump Mish on this show, I pump his tires, and after 15 years, the least he could have done was show me a secret passage, for God's sake.
You finally hit your
cow.
quota. You finally hit your quota of Power Lunch appearances.
Look, we have high
God-
standards
for
on this
God's
show.
sake.
I have
should
a little-
I should be Mish's agent.
I
I
have
should
a
get
little-
a percentage of this show.
I have a little Power Lunch card, Jack. I've been stamping it with a little Edmonton Oilers logo
great.
stamp every time you come on, and you've hit 10. So now you get the
get a
free
free
tour
sub at
of Amalie
Captain's
Arena.
And Blind
Yeah, up to the
Squirrel,
press
maybe a
box.
copy of his book and signed autograph, and maybe that'll be part of it. But we'll get that code as well. Jack, thank you, sir. We appreciate you.
Thanks,
You bet.
Jack. See you
Cheers.
tonight.
All right. Jack Michael's joining us right there. It's always fun to have him on. I always
I
bust
met
his chops.
Jack the first time I met Jack. Actually, he'd reached out to me,
Yeah.
and I was in the NHL at this point. He reached out to me because he had a demo, and I never say no if somebody wants me to listen to their demo. And my reaction was probably much like Mike Lang's reaction when he heard Jack earlier, because Jack at that point was doing minor league hockey. He was in Alaska. Alaska had an ECHL team at the time. I don't think they still have an ECHL team.
Yeah.
But he was doing their games, and he was very well compensated. I remember when we had the conversation, he's like, "I'd have to think long and hard about moving to the AHL because it would probably be a pay cut for me," which fair enough, even though it's a higher level. And he went straight from Alaska ECHL to Edmonton. As an American, that's also unusual to be hired as a Canadian team broadcaster. So he sent me the demo. I listened to it. It was excellent. We chatted on the phone. And it was not long after that that I got asked to speak at the ECHL annual meetings, which were in the summer, but they had the broadcasters were there too. And I spoke to the broadcasters. And it was in Las Vegas. They flew me from Tampa to Las Vegas to meet with the broadcasters, and he was there. So that was the first time we actually met face to face, but we had communicated prior to that, and it wasn't long after that. I think he said 15 years. So
Yeah.
it was within a couple of years that he got the job. That was, I think, 08 maybe. I did that thing with the ECHL, and it was within a couple of years that he got the job with the Oilers. And he started on radio, and now he's doing TV.
Do they do both? Do they do?
They do
simulcast?
both, but Jack is in a position so for Canadian TV, it's not. I mean, it's kind of like Dave Randorf with the Lightning when it's a national game. Like tonight, Dave Randorf is not doing the game, right? Canada's a little different because they have a lot of national games.
Yeah, right.
Like whenever the Oilers would be on Hockey Night in Canada, they're not doing the local. By local, it's still a national network. It's Rogers or TSN or whatever. And that depends on the team. Some teams are with TSN, fewer now, and the rest are with Rogers. But it's like a regional broadcast, right? So when there's Hockey Night in Canada, just as an example, or these Amazon games now, the Monday Amazon games, which are Canadian-based broadcasts, like the Lightning have been in some of these broadcasts when they played Toronto, I think, actually.
Yeah.
If they're playing on a Monday against a Canadian team, it's probably going to be on Amazon, and John Forsland does those games. So in those instances, Jack actually goes back to radio. So when he cannot do TV for the Oilers, they still have him on radio, and the same is true in the playoffs, where, I mean, certainly in the U.S. after the first round, the local broadcasts go away. I'm not sure how it works in Canada. They may be bumped off in round one, as a matter of fact, because there aren't as many teams, right? And not all the teams make the playoffs. So there are fewer games that, and I think that the national, what we'll call national in Canada broadcasters, they just do all the playoffs. So Jack is still working even when he's not actually doing TV.
You mentioned, and I think it's a really good point, American working in Canada as the lead play-by-play guy.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's kind of like a Pittsburgh guy rooting for the Browns. He's got that in his DNA, right?
But does that
it's actually nothing like that.
Yeah.
But
is that kind of odd?
It's very unusual. We'll have to ask Jack.
How many times does that happen?
When I start a new card for him with a new stamp next time, if he's the only and the first U.S.-born announcer to call games for a Canadian-based team.
Is it rare to have?
Very unusual.
Let me ask you this, because, I mean, Dave Randorf is Canadian, correct? And he's calling Lightning games. Is that less?
In the other direction?
Yeah, and the other, is that less of a thing?
It happens, certainly for the analysts, because a lot of them are former players.
Well, the analysts, but I'm talking about the lead play-by-play guy.
I'd have to kind of think through the list.
Yeah. Can you
I don't think it's common, but it's probably not as unusual. I mean, there are just fewer Canadian teams, so those jobs are extremely sought after.
Right.
Obviously. And all the Canadian teams, the 7 teams that are based in Canada, do have what I will call their regional television announcers.
Yes.
Even though it's really a national network that is just aired in a regional area, basically. Right. And Montreal has English and French for both TV and radio. So, I mean, basically they're 8 times 2. Yep. You got 8 TV crews and you've got 8 radio crews. And that's it. Yeah. It's not a lot of jobs.
No.
For aspiring NHL broadcasters who aspire to be a broadcaster in the NHL who grew up in Canada.
It's probably those junior jobs.
They also do a rotation. I should just back up. Like they do a rotation. So like Dave Randorf worked at TSN and worked at Rogers. He wasn't necessarily affiliated only with one team, but he did a rotation. So they have a kind of a stable of broadcasters, and they'll do a mix. Like Gord Miller, he's on the TSN side. Chris Cuthbert is on the Rogers side. You know, we've seen these announcers, you know, come through, and sometimes it's a different announcer because it's kind of like ESPN has their one team and then their next team and then a third team, and you know they kind of use them based on where they need to fill games. So it may be more than 16, which is what I had said.
I think it's fascinating that how that goes, and you'd probably think in Canada the junior ranks, those are probably
there are a lot of jobs
after,
there.
Right?
Yeah,
but those
there
are probably
good
positions to a degree because everybody is paying attention. I mean, that's a high level type of situation. Curious what our audience thinks when it comes to Jack's assessment of the Lightning
and the
terms
league.
Of, yeah,
he had that's a pretty interesting take. So what he kept saying is who's better? Well, and then he kind of prefaced it. The teams that were in the bottom half last year have gotten better. There's no question Ottawa is better, whether it's coaching, goaltending, whatever. There are teams like that. Columbus is better. Certainly, New Jersey, which is in a top 3 spot in the Metro, is better from last year. What he's really talking about, or what he was talking about, the teams that got in the playoffs last year that were contending for the Stanley Cup, how many of them are actually better?
Yeah.
And in his opinion, none, except maybe the Lightning, based on how they've improved defensively with Vasilevsky and McDonough.
I found that fascinating, because I think a lot of people, we've talked, again, we're in the weeds when it comes to Tampa Bay, and we sometimes see the warts more than others. But I think we've also said this is a pretty good Lightning team. And
Right.
I think Jack's looking at it and saying, all right, maybe the last couple of years the goaltending hasn't been at Vasi standards for maybe obvious reasons, specifically last year. But that if he gets back to where he was, there's nobody who can really take that step and improve more so than the Lightning, because you're going from a really good goaltender to an elite / Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
And, and that's why I asked him, for Edmonton's sake, partner, internally, is there somebody or a couple of players that potentially that could improve their play, that would allow the Oilers to take another step? But he mentioned some guys who have come back down a little bit, and maybe that's part of this.
It sounds like he really feels they need to add some young legs at the deadline. I mean, he referred to their team as old, older team. He said that a few times, and I didn't really think of the Oilers in that way because Stuart Skinner is their main goalie. He was a Calder finalist last year, even though it was his second season. But based on games played, he was eligible for the Calder, and I mean, McDavid and Draisaitl are in their prime, certainly.
Right.
But when you look at it, they lost a couple of players due to offer sheets, right? St. Louis nabbed them both. And they traded Ryan McLeod to Buffalo. They actually got Matt Lavoie in return. It was a high draft pick. He's a younger guy. He's playing for them right now, but it's only his third game of the year if he's going to be in tonight. But, Ekholm is not a spring chicken. And some of the other guys they added, Arvidsson is not young. So I can see where he's going with that. I guess I was a little surprised, 2-week break, older team, not firing on all cylinders, back-to-back. That makes sense when he spelled it out that way. I wouldn't have jumped to that conclusion, but we're not following the Oilers as closely as he is. But here's kind of the quote-unquote bad news for the Lightning. Now that they've gotten those 2 games under their belt, and they had a practice day, or maybe they had an off day yesterday, but I would not expect that they are going to be still feeling the effects of the 2-week break tonight. However, they're still in a very good spot in terms of their standings position, and we did see this with the Lightning. He's absolutely right. In the years when they were, going deep in the playoffs every year, sometimes it's hard to get really amped up for, regular season game 58 or 59 when you know that.
Yeah, it's fair.
You kind of have a little wiggle room there, and it's kind of like wake me up and tap me on the shoulder, not wake me up. And, let me know when it's game 1 of the playoffs. So if there's some of that in Edmonton's game, and has been in Edmonton's game, that's not always the easiest thing to just flush out of your system. But giving up 13 goals in 2 games is not going to sit well with this team. So I think they are going to be fired up to play tonight, and we'll see if that elevates Edmonton's overall game. For the Lightning, though, I mean, they did shake off the rust. They had a very good third period the other night against Seattle, and they want to keep it going. The first game between the teams, interestingly, because we've talked about Edmonton's kind of defensive struggles here in the last couple, that was a low-scoring, low-chance game. It was a weird game for Lightning Oilers. 2-1, the Oilers won. Both teams were basically in the mid to low 20s for shots. I think the Oilers had 26. Lightning might have had 22 or 23. There wasn't a lot of real estate out there. I think both teams looked a little flat offensively. I remember talking with you about it after the game. It's kind of like it was not a particularly impactful game for some of the top players, like you just mentioned, some of the superstars that are on the ice when the Lightning and Oilers meet. It was a less than spectacular game for all of those guys, even though McDavid and Draisaitl scored the goals for Edmonton. Gensel scored the goal for the Lightning. We'll see what tonight brings. We'll see if the Oilers are ticked off enough about what happened over the weekend that their game will elevate and they're not going to be hemorrhaging scoring chances against, which the Lightning will gladly take if that's the way this game is going to go.
7:30 start.
7:30, ESPN Plus, yeah.
Yeah, pregame will be at 7 o'clock. I do have some questions.
Yeah, let's try and get them in the last 5 minutes if we can.
Good friend Jim says, in baseball, many times after a player is recovered from an injury, they will go down to the team's minor league affiliate and play a game or two to get their timing back as rehab assignment. I've never seen that in hockey. You mentioned on Monday's show, although J.J. Moser did well on Sunday, he still seemed a little bit off. In the NHL for the Lightning, is injury rehab for a couple of games in the minors not allowed?
It is allowed. It's called a conditioning stint. They just chose not to do it with J.J. Moser. And was it Jim? Jim had that question.
Good friend Jim.
Yeah, I don't think we see it a lot, but it is allowed, and occasionally we do see it.
Some guys do just come back and they go right into an NHL game as well. I think that's part of it. I think some of that may be also how long the baseball season is. It's a different sport in terms of timing, particularly if you're a hitter. And even if you're getting some reps for a week down in AAA, does that better prepare you to hit major league pitching compared to coming off the DL and going right in to see a starting major league caliber pitcher? I mean, I think there's some of that as well.
Waivers are not a factor, too. When you go on conditioning, you can go down and you don't have to clear waivers. That's part of the deal. But you can't stay down forever. It's basically like a couple of games, and then you have to bring the player back up.
Basil says Jack Michaels is the best guest of all time. Such great perspective of the league as a whole and doesn't pull any punches. Really fun.
Best guest of all time.
We love that.
I should send him a, what is that, BGAT, a BGAT? I have a made-up card. I didn't actually make a card. It's in my imagination, but I should actually create a card for him and put BGAT on there. Best guest of all time.
I love it. Basil also said he still thinks he's right from, I guess, the other day when he felt like the Bolts played good.
Well, John Cooper disagreed, Basil. Yeah. So I was actually thinking about what Basil said. So I was kind of going through the list. Okay, Gergenson's hit the post twice. Kucherov had a chance early in the game. Hagel scored. This is in the first two periods. Point had the chance. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. They had some looks on Stezga. What they did not do well enough, though, was kind of control pace of play and flow of play. They were on their heels for much of the first two periods. And you're not gonna convince me otherwise, Basil. But I do grant you when he said the Lightning may have had more scoring chances than Seattle. I mean, Seattle had some in the second period, but the Lightning did well to create some pretty good looks, even without having the puck a lot, honestly, in the first two periods.
Lucas, my neighbor, says Coop was on the Chicklets podcast. Great listen from him, as always. One of his many stories was talking about the bug all the players got. He mentioned Hagel getting it really bad coming home. Pretty amazing he had the game he did after throwing up all night.
Oh, I didn't know about that. Coop referenced that Hagel was under the weather. Coop actually sounded like he might have a little head cold when he did the media this morning. We heard the clip at the start, or he just he was yelling so much after they won the Four Nations that his voice was a little hoarse.
It's one of those things.
That's part of the deal, man. I mean, when they have the flu, when they call the flu, which to me is not necessarily the flu, but it means that like you cannot go out and play. You got a high fever, you're weak. Understood. And some players have to miss games due to illness. Yeah. But often if it's a head cold, you just don't feel great.
You're out there.
But you can still play. Yeah, that's probably what Hagel was dealing with. Although, I mean, if he was throwing up all night,
maybe he actually
that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one where, not to get graphic, but like if you're vomiting, like you're losing fluid. Yeah. And dehydration is going to be a problem. So you got to do what you can to try and replenish those fluids.
We also will offer a health segment here on the show as we give you your vitals.
Well, that's not advanced health, but even I know that if you're losing fluid some way,
you gotta replenish it somewhere.
You got to replenish it. Yes.
What's the one? And I have no idea if this is true. Is pickle juice a real thing? You hear about
that's
that.
Blake
Blake
Coleman.
Coleman,
that's why he had the nickname Pickle. Yeah. Well, he swears by it.
He does.
I like pickles. I'm not sure I've ever
I do like pickles.
drank pickle juice.
No, I don't think you could pay me to do that, but although everybody has a price, Dave. So maybe.
I guess. I wouldn't mind drinking the pickle juice. I don't mind the kind of sour taste. What's a non-starter for me? Like, I don't even want to be in
Mushrooms.
the same room as it. No, I don't mind mushrooms.
Yeah.
Mayonnaise.
Really?
Or what they call now aioli, which is like, this is mayonnaise. Stop giving it a fancy name so you can charge more and get this thing away from my plate. I don't want it near my plate.
Really?
I don't want it in the same room as my plate.
You don't like
no
mayonnaise?
aioli.
No mayonnaise.
Yeah.
Really?
I think it's a texture thing. I was once forced to eat like a sandwich with mayonnaise, I think, when I was a kid, and I was like, ugh.
That's
And it
nasty.
stuck with me.
Yeah.
If I were
Mustard's
brave,
good.
I would go back to it because, as you know, we tell our kids, well, you have to taste a food like 11 times or whatever
You do. If you want
before
that
you
treat.
can reject it.
Well, and if you want that treat, I need to see 6 bites.
I think for me, it was 1 for mayonnaise, and then it was a complete
And
and
you were
utter
done.
rejection.
You like
Yes.
mustard? You like mustard though on your sandwich?
I'm not crazy about mustard, but I can tolerate that more than
tolerate it.
mayonnaise.
Are you more plain then?
But look, ketchup, salsa, red is fine. It's the white stuff. Keep the white stuff away from me. My wife loves ranch. I'm like,
Hey,
not so much.
That's a good lesson for the
No.
kids.
Yeah.
So we'll go there. All right. Well, we had a lot
that
of
note,
fun. On
yes.
that note, we want to thank Jack Michaels and everything that he was bringing to the show. It was very good to catch up with him. And we'll get to more of your questions tomorrow. And then hopefully recapping a pretty entertaining game tonight. 7:30
Yeah, Lightning
starting
going for win number 6 in a row.
Should be a lot of fun. Pre-games at 7. Partner, I'll talk to you down at the rink tonight.
Yeah,
Great job.
later start tonight, 7:30.
Yep.
So
No doubt. All right. Thank you, and thanks to Steve Versnick and Jared Johnson. I'm Greg Linnelli. You've been listening to Power Lunch on Lightning Radio.